Gallianists were supporters of the Italian immigrant insurrection anarchist Luigi Gallieni, who was active primarily in the United States after immigrating there. Most Gallienists were working-class Italian immigrants, or Italian Americans, particularly those engaged in anarchism and the labor movement. They are widely considered the main suspects behind the series of bombings in the U.S. between 1914 and 1920. On September 9, 1917, Reverend Augusto Giuliani of the Milwaukee Italian Evangelical Church organized a rally near the Gallienist gathering place in Milwaukee's Bayview neighborhood. When anarchists disrupted the event, police opened fire on the crowd, killing 2, arresting 11, and prompting a raid on the Gallienists. Just over 2 months later, on November 24, 1917, social worker Maud L. Richter discovered a large black powder bomb disguised as a package near Reverend Giuliani's church in Milwaukee's 3rd Ward. She dragged it into the church basement and alerted the janitor, Sam Mazzone, who then transported it to the Central Police Station at Oneida and Broadway. While the station keeper was showing the device to Lieutenant Robert Flood, just before a scheduled inspection, it detonated. The explosion killed 9 police officers and 1 civilian woman, who had been at the station to report a robbery. 6 other officers, a lieutenant and 5 detectives, were seriously injured. 1 detective bore the full force of the blast, his body severely mangled, while another officer was killed on the 2nd floor. The explosion was so powerful that it was heard across much of the city, drawing thousands of onlookers to the scene. At the time, authorities suspected the Gallienist anarchists involved in the Bayview incident had placed the bomb outside the church. Though no one was ever apprehended for the bombing, shadow loomed over the trial of the 11 alleged Italian anarchists arrested in connection with the Bayview unrest. The uncharged crime influenced the proceedings, leading to the conviction of all 11. However, in 1918, renowned attorney Clarence Darrow spearheaded an appeal that secured the release of most of the convicted individuals. Edward Nichols, Roy Wilson, and Dewey Morris, residents of Bend, Oregon, planned to spend the winter of 1923 and 1924 working as fur trappers in the wilderness. They settled into a log cabin owned by a local logging contractor, Edward Logan, in the fall of 1923. The week before Christmas, Nichols visited Bend in high spirits, selling a sled full of valuable furs. He told locals that their trapping efforts had been successful. After Christmas, resort owner Alan Wilcoxon set out on snowshoes from his home in Fall River to his resort at Elk Lake. On January 15, 1924, he stopped at Logan's cabin to visit the 3 men, who appeared to be in good spirits and reported a prosperous season. The next morning, January 16th, Wilcoxon continued his journey, unknowingly becoming the last person to see Nichols, Wilson, and Morris alive. After months without any word from the 3 men, and noticing that local mink traps had been left unattended, Innes Owen Morris, brother of Dewey Morris, and Pearl Lyons, superintendent of the Tumalo Fish Hatchery, grew concerned. In April of 1924, a search team traveled to the cabin, but found no sign of the men. Inside, they discovered burnt food in pots on the stove, and a dining table set for a meal. Outside, the sled used for transporting supplies was missing, and a fox pen behind the cabin, once holding 5 valuable foxes owned by Edward Logan, was now empty. In the corner of the pen, searchers found a blood-stained claw hammer. Checking the men's trap lines, they came across the frozen remains of 12 martens, 4 foxes, and 1 skunk, indicating the traps had been neglected. The next day, Deschutes County Sheriff Clarence A. Adams arrived to investigate. Near the shore of Big Lava Lake, searchers found the men's large sled, stained with what was later confirmed to be blood. At the lake's edge, they discovered a depression in the ice where a hole had been cut and refrozen. Further along a trail leading to the lake, they spotted pools of blood in the thawing snow, along with clumps of hair and a human tooth. As the lake's ice had thawed enough for a boat to search, Adams and Innes Morris ventured onto the water. There, they made a grim discovery: the bodies of all 3 men floating on the lake's surface. Autopsies confirmed that all 3 men had died from gunshot wounds and blunt force trauma, likely inflicted with a hammer. Wilson had been shot in the right shoulder and the back of the head. Nichols suffered a shotgun blast that shattered his jawbone, along with a revolver bullet wound to his head. Morris had been shot in the left forearm and sustained a skull fracture, presumably from a hammer. Investigators estimated that the murders took place in late December of 1923 or early January of 1924. A report published in April of 1924 suggests that at least 2 of the men had been lured away from the cabin before being killed. Initially, authorities suspected a woodsman and moonshiner named Indian Erickson, who had a camp near Cultus Lake. However, Erickson was cleared after providing a solid alibi. Shortly after the bodies were discovered, Edward Logan provided police with a possible suspect, a fellow trapper named Lee Collins, who had previously quarreled with the men over an alleged stolen wallet. Collins had reportedly threatened to return and kill Nichols. Investigators soon uncovered that Lee Collins was actually Charles Kimsey, a fugitive wanted for robbery and attempted murder in Bend. In 1923, Kimsey had been arrested for attacking stagecoach driver W.O. Harrison, throwing him down a well. Though Harrison survived, Kimsey fled before the trial. A breakthrough came when a Portland traffic officer recalled encountering Kimsey on January 24, 1924. Carrying a gunny sack, Kimsey had asked for directions to a fur dealer and was sent to Schumacher Fur Company, where he sold the sack of furs for $110. Despite this lead, the case soon went cold. Nearly 9 years later, on February 17, 1933, Kimsey was spotted in Kalispell, Montana, and apprehended. He was extradited to Oregon for questioning about the murders, but police lacked definitive proof. The fur dealer who had purchased the furs in 1924 was unable to positively identify Kimsey. Though authorities had a circumstantial case against him, Kimsey was never charged with the murders. Instead, he was convicted for the 1923 attempted murder of Harrison and sentenced to life in the Oregon State Penitentiary. The Lava Lake murders remain officially unsolved. Eleanor Reinhardt was married to James E. Mill, and they resided at 49 Carmen Street in New Brunswick, New Jersey. James worked as the acting sexton at St. John the Evangelicus Episcopal Church and served as a full-time janitor at Lord Sterling Elementary School, both located in New Brunswick. The couple had 2 children, Charlotte E. Mills and Daniel Mills. Edward Wheeler Hall married Frances Noel Stevens on July 20th, 1911. He grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and earned his theological degree in Manhattan. After completing his studies, he relocated from New York to Basking Ridge, New Jersey, before settling at St. John the Evangelist Episcopal Church in New Brunswick. At the time of the murder, Edward resided at 23 Nickel Avenue in New Brunswick. On September 16, 1922, the bodies of Eleanor Mills and Edward Hall were discovered in a field near a farm in Somerset County, New Jersey. Both were found lying on their backs, having been shot with a .32 caliber pistol, Hall once in the head and Mills 3 times. The bullet that struck Hall entered above his right ear and exited through the back of his neck. Mills had been shot under her right eye, over her right temple, and above her right ear. A police officer at the scene also observed that her throat had been slashed, with maggots already present in the wound, indicating that the deaths had occurred at least 24 hours earlier. It appeared that the bodies had been deliberately positioned side by side, with their feet pointing towards a crabapple tree. Hall's face was covered by a hat, and his calling card had been placed at his feet. Torn-up love letters were scattered between the 2 bodies. A jurisdictional dispute complicated the initial investigation, as the crime scene lay near the border between Somerset and Middlesex counties. While the New Brunswick police from Middlesex County were the first to arrive, the murders had actually taken place in Franklin Township, Somerset County. During the confusion, crowds of curiosity seekers trampled the area, took souvenirs, and even passed around Hall's calling card, severely compromising the physical evidence. The female victim was identified as Eleanor Reinhardt Mills, the wife of James E. Mills. She was dressed in a blue dress with red polka dots, black silk stockings, and brown shoes. Her blue velvet hat was found nearby on the ground, while a brown silk scarf was wrapped around her throat. A bruise was visible on her arm, along with a small cut on her lip. Her left hand had been positioned to rest on Hall's right thigh. The male victim was identified as Edward Wheeler Hall, an Episcopal priest from New Brunswick. His right arm was positioned to touch Mill's neck, and his face was concealed by his hat, hiding the gunshot wound to his head. He was wearing glasses and had minor injuries, including a bruise on the tip of his ear and abrasions on his left little finger and right index finger. A wound was also found on his right calf, about 5 inches below his kneecap. His gold watch was missing, though coins remained in his pocket. The primary suspects in the murder were Hall's wife, Frances Noel Stevens, her brothers, Henry Hugill Stevens and William Carpenter Stevens, and their cousin, Henry Carpenter. The initial investigation led by Joseph E. Stricker in 1922 did not result in any indictments. However, ongoing speculation in the New York Daily Mirror, spurred by statements from an associate of one of Mrs. Hall's housekeepers, prompted Governor A. Harry Moore to order a second investigation and a trial in 1926. Henry Carpenter successfully petitioned to be tried separately from the others and was ultimately never brought to trial. The Hall Mills trial commenced on November 3, 1926, at the Somerset County Courthouse in Somerville, with Judges Charles W. Parker and Frank Cleary presiding. Lasting approximately 30 days, the trial attracted nationwide attention due to the prominence of the wealthy Stevens and Carpenter families. The prosecution was led by Alexander Simpson, while the defense team included Robert H. McCarter, a former New Jersey Attorney General, and Timothy N. Pfeiffer. Joseph A. Farrout served as the fingerprint expert, and Raymond C. Stryker was the jury foreman. The prosecution's key witness was Jane Gibson, a pig farmer whose property the bodies had been found. However, defense sought to discredit her by portraying her as uneducated and mentally unstable. Her testimony varied in different accounts given to the police, the press, and at the trial, where she testified from a hospital bed rolled into the courtroom. Ultimately, all 3 defendants were acquitted. If you liked this video, subscribe for more like it. You can also join my Discord and post video suggestions there. Thanks for watching.